I joined the Navy and was sworn in on April the 4th. And April the 5th I was to turn 18, so I had to be sworn in before I was 18 years old. But on April the 20th I was assigned to be in San Diego to naval training, which made it so that I couldn't complete my course in high school at that time, but it was nearly finalized. But with the credit that I got in the Navy, that made it so that I could graduate with the class.
How long was you in the Navy?
Well, it's about a year and a half. It seems like, but I am not positive of that. I remember getting out and how happy I was to get out of there. But it wasn't the type of life that I wanted to pursue. It was something that I just I didn't relish that much.
Mm-hmm. But while you were there, you did real well, and
yes, while I was there was a lot of things happened, and there was some funny things happened. I'd tell about one story if you don't mind.
Okay.
That happened. There was probably a couple of them that I could talk about. I had he wasn't a friend, but I know of a person in town, Billy McCary. And Bill McCary was a very timid person. We always called him a weakling, and he was. He didn't have a lot of strength and things. But nevertheless, he was a very, very polite person. And there was a person that while I was in the Navy that was about in the same category. He was just didn't do things, didn't interrupt anybody. He just went about life easily. But there was always a few bullies around, and there was one special guy, I guess you might call him special, was a bully. And he picked on this person considerably. And the person would get hurt, and he would cry, and finally one day I couldn't take it any longer, and I told him, heck, why don't you leave him alone? He isn't bothering you, he isn't hurting you or anything. And he didn't say anything, and he just kind of turned away, and I turned away to go back to my locker to open it up, and there he was, and he was on to me right now. And I remember turning around and getting a hold of him, and we wrestled around there, and I threw him on the floor, and I put the horn lock on him, and I put all the pressure, and I guess I must have been pretty mad, because I put all the pressure and all the strength that I had, and he went unconscious. And I recall when they finally got me off from it, I told them, they said, you about killed him, and I said, I would have killed him if he hadn't got off, and I would have done, because I was really mad that he couldn't breathe. But he didn't bother me no more. And later on, he came over to me and apologized, and he said he would like to learn to be a professional wrestler. And you know a lot of holds or something, he said, to do, you're really good. And so we used to come in to the barracks, and as we came in the barracks, and we both had to be there at about the same time, the people and the other guys all around us would take their mattresses and throw them on the floor, and then they'd get around and sit around and hold the mattresses in place and want us to wrestle and practice. And we wrestled and wrestled and wrestled, and I tried to teach him some of the holds and everything that I knew, which was 28 of them in that particular line that was legal to use. I knew a lot of others that weren't legal. But he never did throw me. He never could do anything. I could pin him most any time I wanted. But I often wondered if he ever was able to accomplish his goal that he had in mind of being a professional wrestler. If he ever did, I thought, boy, where would I have been?
Did you go to the temple the first time when you was married, or did you get your downloads out before?
No, I went to the temple the first time when I got married, and I remember those times. I remember going there, and I remember it was one of the happiest moments in my life, and I had the sweetheart of my life with me. And she's always been there for me, and she's always been a sweetheart.
How did you meet Mom?
Well, I had a friend, and this friend we talked about, Bob Bullen. He was at going to school at Utah State University at that time, and I remember we were going out somewhere that evening. I don't know what was the date. I think it was for another date or something, but I remember going down to meet him, and it was in the cafeteria down below in one of the buildings and that. And I remember waiting there for him, and I was down just off of the steps, just kind of standing around there, and this girl came through the door. It was south of where I was standing, probably about 50 feet, 75 feet away. And I remember when I looked at her, a funny feeling came over to me, and she had to come up, and she stood right there, just not very far from me, and she was putting knives, forks, and spoons and things like that, and doing some things there. And she kind of, when she came in the door, she got a little ways, and she turned and went back, and she left, like something affected her too. But regardless of how she felt, I really don't know. But I do know that when we left there that day, I asked Bob, I says, who was that girl right there? And he told me who she was. It was Marion Hurst. And I said, I need to get a date with her because she's going to be my wife.
What temple were you sealed in?
In the Logan LDS temple.
Logan. And you had 8 kids.
Yes, we had 8 children, and I have to tell a little story there. You know, they were all sons except for the first 5. There was Catherine, Elena, Joy, and Ann, and Ruth, and then there was David, Rex, and Phil. And they've been very enjoyable to be around, and been special children in my life.
Dad, do you have any faith-promoting experiences that have happened in your life, or prayers that have been answered that you want to talk about? Or
there are so many things that I can testify to. But I suppose some of the things are special, and probably at this time I shouldn't mention, but I do know that there was one special time that we was asked by one of our daughters, Ruth, to go over to do some cemetery hopping and take pictures of cemetery headstones and things like that. And I recall that one of the places that we was assigned to go, and we'd been there several times, and it was over in the Listed Cemetery. And there was somebody we was looking for in that cemetery, and I think it was on her husband's side. And we couldn't find this person. But we found their last name there, but there was no first name that could tie in. But there was, after several trips back and forth there, and we'd been to the Listed office, city office and things, to find out if that person was there, and they didn't have anything. But I recall that just one morning we decided that we had prayer and that, and we went over again. And I remember getting out of the car, and I went directly to this one spot. And Marion, my wife, she went through there and went on, and was kind of going northeast a little further on the hill there, looking around and beyond. And all at once I could hear children laughing and playing and that. And I looked around, there wasn't any children. And I asked Marianne, I says, can you hear those kids playing and laughing? And of course she never heard anything. And then an instant at that time, I don't know whether it was a voice or the feeling came to me, but I know something said, the work's been done. And they were there. Even though the headstone wasn't there, that they were there. And so I called my daughter, and I remember telling her that the work had been done, and the experience that I had. There was one other interesting time while we was talking about cemetery hopping. We was up in St. Anthony, Idaho, and we was going along, and we'd looked all over the cemetery and couldn't find this one person. And we decided that maybe we should leave. So we got in the car and started driving down, and I remember all at once stop. thought came. We stopped and Mary looked out the window and there it was right beside the car. And so we got out and we took our pictures and things like that. And there was quite a number of occasions while we were doing this cemetery hopping that we experienced special experiences to be able to find the people. Sometimes we found people that didn't even know that was there.
Do you remember how you proposed to Mom?
Well, I think I just asked her if she would marry me, and I remember she mentioned something about that I need to ask her parents about it. And we went to Blanding, Utah, that's where she lived at the time, to do this. And I recall going down the road in the car, and I was driving with Mary beside of me, and we had her sister and a couple of friends with us. And as we went down the road and driving that, it seemed like it took us forever and ever, and it got dark, and it was getting dark, and it was getting real late. And all at once, I remember they said, "There it is, there's Blanding." And I looked out the window to see, to look down there, and there was one lone light way down off in there. I could hardly see it. And that was supposed to be where we headed to Blanding. And oh my gosh, what a God-forsaken place to go and live.
Little place.
A little place. But as years went by, it's a very productive place. And it was, of course, there's many lights and buildings there now.
Do you remember anything about your wedding or your honeymoon?
Well, I remember when it came to our reception, I was sick. I had tonsillitis, and I was in bed, and my best friend, Garth Mawson, filled in for me. And I was upstairs in bed. And that was quite an experience. There he was down taking all the greetings and laughs and everything, and I was upstairs with tonsillitis, just high fever and everything. I was having a heck of a time. I had tonsillitis a lot of time in my early life until I had my tonsils out.
Where did you go for your honeymoon?
We went to Yellowstone National Park, and Mom and Dad furnished the monies and things and just took us up there. And it was a very enjoyable time. We had lots of fun.
And you made your first home in Richmond.
Yeah.
It was in the Main Center, which was a small little place, wasn't it?
We made our first home, but we lived in several places in Richmond. And I can't recall the names of the places and that who owned them at that time, but we lived with, we stayed with Mom and Dad for a little bit, and then the Moons in town, there was LeVar Moon. He had a place upstairs and that, and we lived there at one time, and then we lived up east of Richmond, which is 3rd east and about 151 south. And then we moved down into the Doty home, the old Doty home, which was about, it was about 151 east. But it was on the north side of the road. It was a block and a half east of the bank. And then we also pursued in life to do radio and television work, and I bought a little place there in town from Ute Lewis, and I had a radio